Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind abarabove.com, the ultimate resource for craft bartenders, bar operators, and pretty much anybody else who likes yummy drinks.
So I'm a bar consultant with over 15 years of hospitality experience.
And I run a bar above. What that means is I basically try to persuade Chris to write some great articles about bartending. We work together on this podcast, and we run an awesome Facebook group and a pretty neat...
Facebook group is awesome.
It is pretty awesome.
Loving it.
Yeah, it's actually, if you're interested in joining us, it's mixologytalk.com/group. Mm-hmm. And you should also check out our Instagram at abarabove.
This is episode number 135, and this week we're answering a few of our listener questions, and this is one of our favorite episodes to do because there's always great questions that we never think about.
It's true.
So we'll take a stab at it and see if we can answer some of these questions.
Absolutely. So our first question is from Guy from South Carolina. And he says, I have an odd question about cost. I see so many prices with the high-end liquors. What percentage should a bar be charging for a liquor that's $100 plus? I imagine the cost for the bar should get higher because of the overall cost. I'm charging $60 for a 2-ounce pour of Macallan 18 for a 750 ml. If I did the typical cost percentage of 20%, I should be charging $80 plus, but I still think $60 is too much. What do you recommend?
And
such a good question.
This is a great question. I think this is probably a lot of people may have inherited bar programs where the costing is already taken care of. But if you're running a brand new bar, this is definitely going to come up on your radar and something you're going to have to address. So
if you're going to have these high-end spirits, you're gonna need to tackle this one.
Yeah, and to be completely fair and honest, Guy, this could literally be a book. The whole concept of costing a bar program out, you can get as detailed as you want. You can go crazy with spreadsheets. If you ever want a bar manager to start like beaming, ask them to see their spreadsheets. If they're
it's a little personal, don't you think?
It's crazy though. I mean, I've seen some of these spreadsheets that are just like 15 tabs. They're nuts. They're absolutely crazy, and they're all interconnected, and they're beautiful. They're works of art. But this can be a very tricky scenario to answer. So we'll kind of cover a little bit about costing. We're talking a little bit about some advanced techniques on costing, but we're just going to touch the tip of the iceberg as far as costing goes. Yeah. So the first thing to really consider is, what is the target for your bar program? I think this is something that you should talk to the owners or the general manager about. If you have a specific pour cost for your entire bar program, find out what it is. If it's a monthly goal of 20% cost of goods, then you have a lot of wiggle room in there to figure out where your pour costs are going to be. So let's say your signature cocktail program, the stuff on the menu runs at a cost of 15%, for example. So you're coming way under your budget, and you have a lot of room to add additional costs in there. That could be a way of offsetting some of these higher price items. You don't have to charge 20%. So for me, what I did was I ran a low cost of goods on my signature cocktails, try to get them around 13 to 15%, somewhere around there. And then for my higher price items, I would knock them down to a respectable cost of goods, maybe like 30, 35%, 40%. So that way the price point is very attractive for my customers, because at the end of the day, I'm going to be making more money if I sell higher end spirits. So even if it's lower cost, if you have one cocktail that's a $5 profit margin, or you have a Macallan 18 that you sell for $50 where you're making $20 profit for a lot less time involved, this is where things can get really fun. So it's worth having that conversation about what the goals are for a bar program.
But I think there's got to be some subjectivity there too, right? Because at a certain point, no matter what your spreadsheet says, no matter what your numbers are, and I think to Guy's point, if you walk in the door and you see an $80 drink on the menu like that, that feels expensive.
Yeah, and I think there are two ways kind of looking at this. One big critical thing you have to think about when you're costing out a menu, especially on these higher end spirits, is perception. These are signature pours that people will look at, and this kind of like permeates through your entire bar program. So if you have something completely out of whack and way overpriced, somebody, a customer, a connoisseur sees this and says all of a sudden, like, this is completely overpriced. I wonder if the entire menu is overpriced.
Yeah, that's a good
so
point.
this is something to consider when you're starting to put things in print. And putting numbers down is, there's some benchmark spirits where people can compare them from one to another. Macallan 18 is one of those standout spirits that you don't see very often, but if you do and you enjoy it, you're really going to focus on a price.
That's very true. That's very true.
Yeah, so this could be something overall that you really develop as a strategy. Kind of as a side story, I worked for a place in San Francisco where the owner had an incredible idea. Top 25 spirits from around the world, and he was going to charge cost plus like $10. So this is stuff you just can't experience because you don't want to drop $1,000 on this bottle. And it was right in the middle of financial district, and it was a really incredible program. So
it was perfect for your market.
It really was.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of financial district. So lawyers and bankers and people with a lot of disposable income that really enjoyed the finer things in lives. They really love that program. And it didn't get calculated into my bonuses, which was really nice. So
that's a good point.
My targets were completely different for that list versus the rest of my cocktail program.
Right. If your bonuses are calculated based on what's your overall cost of goods, then that kind of
throws it right out the window.
Yeah.
But if you're pouring,
I guarantee it brought people in the door.
Yeah, and if you're pouring, one shot, a 2-ounce pour of one spirit, and you get $10 for that. At the bottom line for the business, it's a good deal.
And I guarantee that's not the only thing they're buying.
Right, exactly.
It's your loss leader.
Yeah.
Not a loss, but...
It was fun. It was a really great program to kind of design that menu and all that stuff. But these are some things to keep in mind as you're putting pricing down on paper.
And I guess, to what extent would you suggest that people just test it? Because, if you were if you're outside the bar and you were in a store, you might just say, well, I'll make it $80 one week and $60 the next week and run my numbers and see where I made more profit.
Right.
Can you do that, or are you going to piss people off?
You don't want to kind of fluctuate pricing that much if you get away with it. When I was doing menu changes, I would tweak certain things once a quarter.
Okay.
I would pick a handful of spirits and start manipulating them and finding the best pricing strategy for them. And at the end of the day, for me, it never really made a difference, as far as movement goes. I think it's more about the perception of your bar program than the actual numbers. In my experience, it was only a handful of restaurants I did that with, but for us, it was more about perception than actual
I would think that would be pretty risky if one week you're charging $60 for something and then somebody comes back and the following week they get their tab and it's $80. I'd be pretty bummed about that.
Yeah, and usually if people complain more the opposite direction. So if it's $60 one week and it's $35 the next, they're like, whoa, I've been paying $60 this whole time, and all of a sudden it's $35. They'll probably say something once.
Basically, you're going to piss people off no matter which direction you go.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why
maybe don't
small adjustments here and there are always a good thing. For sure.
Is it worth looking around at other bars in your neighborhood and seeing what they're charging?
I think so. I think this is a really good strategy in general. A lot of people have their menus online, so you can find the top 5 bars in your area. Find out what they're charging because it's pretty easy to tell these days.
Yeah.
And if worst case scenario, you have to go in and have a drink.
For science.
Oh no! You're doing competitive analysis is what I like to call it.
Competitive. You better write it down though. You may not remember.
Right. So it's absolutely worth seeing what other people are charging. Find out who your true competitors are in your market. Just because they're in your neighborhood doesn't mean you're their competition. A neighborhood bar versus a craft bar, pricing is going to be different no matter what.
Very true.
So find people in the same kind of caliber as you, and then do some comparison between pricing on that.
So I think we've done a really good job of answering your question without answering the question, which is really our forte.
Right.
So the answer is it depends.
Right.
But the message that I'm getting from you, Chris, is really to focus more on perception than anything else. I think, how would you feel about Guy, asking a trusted regular what they think?
Absolutely. I absolutely would, especially somebody that buys a spirit all the time. I would be careful because if they're not honest and they're kind of out for themselves, they're going to get tell you,
No,
what's
it
going to
should
be best
totally
for them.
be cheaper. It should be $20.
Macallan 18 should be $18. Maybe not, but still,
And maybe get more than one perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just kind of bounce their idea like, hey, by the way, I'm thinking about dropping the price. What do you think? Kind of give them a little bit of emotional preparedness for that day, either for excitement or you can have that conversation before it actually happens. But I think it's a really good idea. Just, ask your customers, say, hey, would you pay this for that? And go from there.
And manage your perceptions accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like I said, with these higher end spirits, I think we actually touched upon this with the interview from the analytical tool people. We just
BevSpot?
Yeah, BevSpot. On the interview for BevSpot, I think he charged.
I'll link to that in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, 10% markup on high end spirits and wine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it was cost plus 10% or something like that. But yeah.
To your point, though, 10% of $60 is very different than 10% of $16.
Right.
If you're looking in terms of like the amount of dollars that comes out the other end.
Yeah.
Plus, it doesn't take a huge amount of effort. I mean, I guess in some cases you may have to get a ladder, but
Right.
but you're not pouring a 4-step cocktail.
Right, exactly. So, there's a lot of benefits in pouring premium spirits, and it's really, at the end of the day, it's up to you and what you, your management, and your owner are comfortable with charging and, the perception that you want to put in front of your guests.
Yeah, definitely.
So the next question comes from Matt from North Carolina, and he's asked us, one of our bartenders is a mixologist. He takes a lot of time to make drinks, and I've seen him work the tiki bar. His drinks are compromised by the amount of time it takes to make the drinks. He's great inside with minimal people. I've seen his tips compared to mine, and they're relatively pretty much the same. I like the fancy focus he takes on the drinks, but if the guests like the cocktails I make minus all the fancy stuff, then what's the point of going to mixology? I make good cocktails fast, and he takes way too much time.
I think this is such a great question.
Such a good question.
It's such a, I mean, the word mixology it's such a
hot
loaded,
button.
it's almost a pejorative nowadays.
Yeah.
And this is coming from people who started a podcast called the Mixology Talk Podcast.
We get it.
Like, we get it. Seriously. I love that Matt calls this out because I think a lot of people think this in the back of their head and they're afraid to call it out.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is it really depends on what the word mixology means. Well, let's start there, and we'll work our way back to Matt's situation. This is something we've talked about a lot in the past. Actually, one of our ancient videos.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and link to that in the show notes. Is a discussion on what we believe the word mixology means to us.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you what it means to you, but what it means to us is it's the work that happens long before the guest walks in the door.
Right.
It's the cocktail creation. It's the sort of like
education,
the
spirit
recipe
selection,
development.
Yeah.
It's like the chef side of things, not the cook. It's the person developing the recipe. It's that work. But what you don't typically see in a high volume restaurant is a chef inventing recipes during service.
Right, exactly.
So, I mean, I think that's one of the key things I wanted to highlight here is the word mixology. I mean, I get it. I get why it has the connotation it has. It's exactly the situation that Matt is having, that thousands of bartenders probably have every single day looking at their coworkers. But I think the challenge here is, how do you provide an amazing craft cocktail experience without making your guests wait 15 minutes for a cocktail?
Yeah, and I think that's what is really kind of the issue with mixology that I have in general is people use the word mixologist to put a focus on themselves.
Yeah.
And it should never be that way, in my opinion. This is a customer service business. We're customer facing, and it's all about providing hospitality. So when mixology gets in a way of that and takes the attention off the guest and puts it on a person, that's where everything is wrong. I mean, that's the big thing for me. This is a experience we're providing for our guests, and this is how we do that through cool cocktails and all the things that Julian mentioned before. So I think that's That's a big thing as well.
And I will say, there are definitely bars where the whole, like, theme and shtick of the bar is this, like, 14-step cocktail that you get to watch that bartender make. That's awesome. But judging by what Matt is saying here, that's not their style. And if that's their style of bar, then it sounds like Matt didn't get the memo, which I highly doubt that's the case.
Right.
But my point is that it's really about customer expectations. If your customer walks into your bar and they order a Mai Tai, what are they expecting to happen? If they walked into the Aviary in Chicago and they ordered a Mai Tai, they're going to expect something very different than if they walked into the Hotel Utah in San Francisco. Locals will know the one I mean.
It's a dive bar.
Let's just say everything is sticky.
Neighborhood bar.
Neighborhood bar. It's going to be a very different experience. What is your customer expecting?
Right.
Because they're going to tip according to their expectations.
Right, and if those two things aren't aligned, then that's a bigger conversation to have with the bar staff and the bar team and the bar management in general, is like, who are we? What are we doing? You know, what's our goal at this particular bar? Because I think that's a really important conversation to have to get everybody aligned on what service you guys are providing for your guests.
And it's so important that the guests have a consistent experience. If you show up one week and you get your Mai Tai made by Joe Mixologist and it's a 14-step cocktail and it's an incredible, like, craft experience, and then the next week you show up and it's made by Matt and he makes it fast and good and delicious and it tastes good, but it's not the same experience at all, that's confusing. That's
a big problem with just what we do in general, is like that consistency's got to be there. You know, if I go in and there are two different times and there are two different experiences, I don't know which one to expect anymore.
Right. You don't know what kind of bar it is. Right. I don't know what it's going to be like if I go there tomorrow.
So I think this is, I think to the point of what we're saying is you have to be consistent. You have to be on the same page. Everybody needs to be providing the same customer experience, no matter what that is. And that's a topic that your owners and managers should really have figured out, hopefully.
So, I mean, I would say, in terms of replying to Matt here, Matt, if you're listening, if you're watching, what I would say is that we got to figure out who is your bar? Who are you and how do you serve your guest? Because you've got two very different styles of service. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong. They're very different. Yeah. And I think that it needs to be a conversation to figure out who, you know, what does your management, your ownership, your staff, who are you and how do you serve your guest? Get alignment on that. Get agreement on that. And then you can decide who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. Right now, there's no measuring stick to say who's right and wrong because everybody's just doing their own thing. Right. And that's the problem. The problem is the inconsistency. Now, in terms of whether you want to wait 15 minutes for a drink or not, again, I think that has to do with customer expectations. I will say one thing, and that is I think that Mixology in general has a lot to do with the back of house. Right. And in general, unless it's your whole shtick to have an amazing presentation where you show every single step, you may want to consider some pre-batching. Right. You may want to consider working ahead.
It's funny, like when I've been doing consulting in the past, people get bartenders get really hung up on this. They're like, oh, it's got to be a la menu. We got to do all this cool stuff. We got to do all these things. And I guarantee you walk into a lot of these trend-setting bars all over the country, and it's not like that. They are built for speed. They're looking for every possible way to serve more guests faster because at the end of the day, at the business side of things, that's where you're going to make your money.
That's very true.
And, you know, all these 15-step cocktails and tweezers and putting stuff on there, it's all for show. But if it starts to get in the way of customer service, then you're kind of hurting the business. And
you can do a lot of amazing show in like 1 minute.
Right, exactly.
Let's be honest, you don't need 15 minutes.
Yeah, so, you know, on the other side of that coin is if I'm a manager and I have a shift opening on the busiest night, like Friday or Saturday night or whatever your busiest time is, I'm going to look at my tickets, I'm going to look at my bartenders, I'm going to see who's got the highest rings, because even if you're taking home the same amount of tips, if you're ringing more, that means you're producing more. Right. And for me as a manager, I'm like, that's cool, he's making me a lot more money, I'm going to put Matt on the main bar, and I'm going to put you know, craft bartender guy somewhere where he can finesse the guests and have this cool VIP experience or whatever he does. But I'm going to take that into consideration when I fill that position, because I know if I do that, I'm going to make a lot more money as a manager as well.
Right. absolutely. I think you can't ignore the business side of things.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of questions, two questions. Hopefully we answered that first one. The second one, and I think this might be the heart of kind of what you're asking, is why get involved in mixology?
Yeah, you're right. That is a good question, and I think that's a really great point from a bartender's perspective. Why bother?
Right, and I think that may have answered this a couple of different times, but there's a lot of different reasons people kind of get this focus. It could be this natural idea of career progression. Like when you're in control of a cocktail menu, you find that to be a step in the right direction to either becoming a manager, owning your own bar, these kinds of things. So I think a lot of people kind of focus on that as a way of kind of progressing themselves in their career. I know that you get a lot of responses through the emails that we send out.
I do.
What got you into this business, or what makes you interested in craft cocktails?
Yeah, one of the emails that we love to ask is we love to ask folks who join our newsletter, like, why are you here? What do you care about? Are you here for more money? Are you trying to progress your career? Are you just like a huge cocktail nerd? And 95% of the replies that I get are people who say, I just care. I really care about the craft of the cocktail.
Right.
How amazing is that? I think that's what mixology is all about. It's about caring about the craft of a cocktail and the customer experience that goes along with that.
Yeah.
I think the craft of the creative side of actually designing amazing cocktail recipes that you've created yourself, and then that moment where the guest orders it and you make it and you hand it to them and they take a sip and it's amazing. That's the moment it's all about, right?
That's one of the biggest things for me too, just that creative element of, having this concept in your mind about this cocktail, and then knowing how to go through the processes of spirit selection, infusion, flavor extraction, all these things that add up to this one moment where the guest sees it and they're like, I'm going to take a picture of this. I'm going to put it on Instagram, and I'm going to get 1 billion likes on it. Or just that smile you get, or somebody like, I've never seen anything like that before. That's what really got me.
I thought I didn't like gin, but this is amazing.
Right, exactly.
That's a good one.
So I think there's something very unquantifiable about that. Yeah. And I think this is a lot of people in our industry that just absolutely love what they do. So that could be another draw. And it sounds like this bartender is very much of that kind of...
Well, and I think, again... There's two things going on right now. There sounds like there's a bartender on your team, Matt, who loves mixology and gets really into it. But it also sounds that's impacting the guest experience, and that's two different things.
Right.
My point that I think we're both trying to make is mixology can be hugely satisfying, hugely rewarding. It's definitely something that shouldn't be written off just because sometimes people take too long to make their drinks.
Right, exactly.
There are ways to solve the time problem without having to kick mixology to the curb.
Right, exactly. And this could, we've covered this many times in the podcast, but batching, bottled cocktails are great. Carbonated cocktails on draft. There's a bunch of different ways to kind of streamline service and really still focus on an elegant presentation. It doesn't have to all be done a la minute.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot that you can do in advance, or just to make the process go faster.
Right, absolutely. So hopefully we answered the question.
Sounds like it's worth having a conversation with your team, with your manager, and figure out,
who are you guys?
Who are we as a bar?
Yeah.
And then calibrate against that.
Right.
So our last question today actually comes from the Facebook group. I'm not going to say who posted it because I didn't actually ask for his permission to say his name. But this is, I think, a really good question that came up just during the conversation, and I thought it would be worth bringing up today. By the way, the Facebook group you should totally join is at mixologytalk.com/group. And then actually you can probably find this conversation in there.
Yep.
So the question is, I've been tending bars for 12 years now, but I decided to take a break as my enthusiasm has gone away. Do you have any suggestions for what to do to try to bring your enthusiasm back?
And I think this is a really, really good question.
Such a good question.
And I think a lot of people go through this. I went through quite a few cycles of this myself. And I think it's definitely worth having the conversation. And also, if you're a listener and you have something that really worked for you, we would love to hear about what you did to kind of reignite that creative spark or the love for the industry, because I think this is something we should all really start to consider.
I think everybody goes through career slumps. Not to trivialize, I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I think it's a very normal thing to happen. And when it does happen, we have some suggestions for ways that you can kind of bring back the romance.
Bring back the love.
Bring back the love.
So the first thing is kind of figure out what gets you excited about this industry, what drew you into it in the first place, and maybe focus your energy on that. I know just from the previous conversation we had on the previous question, that cocktail development and that guest experience thing, that's what really I love to do. So I found ways of doing that through reading books and, collaborating with people online, to going to seminars, which is something that really kicked me out of my slump, going to events like Tales of the Cocktails and Portland Cocktail Week, and learning from people that are doing the same thing that I am and share this enthusiasm is contagious. So it makes you want to get back to your bar and try all these new techniques and, create all these cool things for your guests. That was like instantaneous, and it lasted for years.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me.
Well, and I think on the other hand, maybe you just love working with people and serving people. I think it's called the service industry for a reason. I know you started bartending because you were looking for kind of an extroverted role where you wouldn't be sitting at a desk all day.
It's true.
A lot of people can sit at desks all day, and a lot of people can't.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this podcast, you're
probably not one of those people.
Probably not a desk job, but
right.
Or maybe you wish you weren't. But just think back on what was it that drew you to this role in the first place, and see. Maybe the thing that got you there isn't something you do very often anymore. Maybe you used to be just so amazingly thrilled about designing your own tiki cocktails, and over the years you kind of drifted away from that and you don't do it much anymore. Well, shoot. I would say go find a way to do that again.
Yeah.
Find a way to do the thing that brought you there in the first place. And if your preferences have changed, that's fine too. But it's worth looking back and seeing what got you started.
Yeah, and I think another thing to do is think about ways of challenging your own self. This is something that really helped me out, is looking at these techniques and trying to figure them out, seeing all these cool things happening on Facebook and, all over the country in different bars. I was like, oh, I need to figure out how to do that. And it really kind of pushed me to really enjoy my job a lot more. When barrel aging first came out, I was like, I got to figure this out. Let's do it. So that it really kind of helped to fuel my passion
Definitely
as well. But I think one of the things that you touched on, which could absolutely be beneficial, and something that I did as well, is to change things up. You touched on the fact that maybe creating tiki cocktails was your thing and you don't do it anymore.
Right.
Maybe it's because you're in a craft bar setting this time. But changing up that bar could be exactly what you need.
Right, absolutely. You can change the bar. You can literally just go work somewhere else. You can change the city.
Yeah.
You can work in the same style of bar in a different city. You can work in a totally different kind of bar. You can go from a craft bar to a neighborhood bar, or a nightclub bar. There's a hotel
bowling
bar.
alley bar.
A bowling alley bar. That sounds like an amazing time. I don't know. But I think there's a lot of things that you can change up. And if you're in a bit of a slump, it might just be time for something new. Now, you didn't indicate when you asked the question whether those 12 years you've been bartending have been, all at the same place.
Right.
But if they have, this is probably where I would start.
Yeah.
Again, it might just be time for mixing things up. And the other thing I wanted to say was, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention this. Is something wrong?
Yeah.
Is your manager mean? Are your coworkers, very negative people? Is your commute just awful?
Yeah.
Maybe think holistically about your job, your day, your shifts, your week. What's the part that you really hate?
Yeah.
Did you somehow get tasked with some role that you just don't like at all? And maybe you got promoted and you actually don't love being a bar manager. You actually miss being a bartender. Chris made that transition back to bartending, and it was huge.
Yeah.
It was so great for you. I know you had definitely
I hit my wall. I mean, I was
Yeah.
done. I remember working 18-hour days, no exaggeration, for a year straight just about. And, I was a general manager of a restaurant, and I hated it. I hated every moment of it. But I felt like that was a natural career path that I should take as bartender, bar manager, general manager. So I understood the business side of running a restaurant. So hopefully one day I could open my own. But at the end of the day, I don't like doing that. I hated it. It just drained my energy every single day. And when I went back to bartending,
You were so
I
happy.
was the happiest person. You can throw anything at me that I couldn't handle at that point.
It's true. Maybe like a large animal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a cow. or kangaroo, I guess. I don't know. I probably couldn't handle that. They're pretty big.
Depends how hard you throw it.
For some reason, like Monty Python's kind of like they're throwing a cow over the wall of a castle.
I can't believe you'd go off topic.
I know. Who does that?
But just, I think it's worth look at your job and maybe it's not that you're holistically burned out. Maybe there's just something wrong that needs to be fixed.
Right.
And how can you fix it?
Yeah.
I mean, not to be too simplistic, but that might having one really negative influence in your life can make everything else seem pretty gray.
Yeah, once you identify it, if it's not a person or a personality that you have a conflict with inside your business, that might be something that could be resolved with a conversation with management. If you say, hey, look, man, here's the deal. I'm super burned out. I've identified the problem. If I can figure out a way around it, I'm not going to leave.
Yeah.
That's huge.
But if I can't, I am.
You're right, exactly.
That's
Like
persuasive.
I want to have a conversation about this. This is really important to me.
Yeah.
I don't like this one thing about my job. They're going to try their best, especially if you're a good employee, which I guarantee you probably are. They're going to try to figure out a way
Yeah.
around it. They're going to support you, and they're going to have your back.
It's something that you often see with seniority. As you become, over the years, lots of people move and change roles. And if you stay where you are, you're kind of implicitly senior. And what often ends up happening with these sort of more senior roles, even if it's not a formal lead bartender or management role, is stuff kind of ends up falling on you. Maybe suddenly you're in charge of making all the syrups and you didn't really ask for that, but the guy who used to make it left.
Right.
And you're the most senior guy, so here you go.
Right.
But maybe you don't like it. But you never had that conversation. I mean, I'm sure there's tons of other examples of the kinds of tasks that inventory. Hopefully that's not something that just got dropped on you. But, these kinds of tasks often end up getting dropped on the most senior person.
Yep. What do they call that? The Peter Principle?
Right, exactly. But it may not have been a thing you chose, and it may not be a thing you like.
Right.
Meanwhile, there may be other bartenders at your bar who are super excited to do those sorts of things because maybe they're trying to work their way up.
Right.
And if it's something you haven't had a conversation about, it might be just an issue of reallocation.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the bar manager or bar owner might say, I'm sorry, that's part of your job, and then your answer is pretty much there. Like Julie said, there are probably other bartenders that are super excited about it,
Yeah.
and it might just be time to take a little bit of a break. And that's another thing that we haven't really touched upon, is maybe it is time to take a break. Maybe it's time to take a step away from what you're doing, refuel your energy, find something else that you're super interested in, because there's so many skills that you have as a bartender that transitions into many other jobs and many other roles. You might find something else that you're super, super excited about, and that's okay. This is part of career development. This is part of finding out who you are, and if you find something else, there's no shame in that.
Yeah,
that's super cool.
We definitely had a conversation about this a couple episodes ago where we talked about some of the other non-bartending career paths
Right.
that you can take with bartending experience. I'll put that in the show notes, which would be, what episode number is this?
I think it's 136.
I think it's 135.
Ooh. Either way, they'll be in the show notes.
That'll
here.
be in the show notes. Mixologytalk.com/
Something.
I think it's 135. I think it's 135. So hopefully we have given you some ideas for any bartenders out there who are sort of going through a slump.
Yep.
Again, just step back, take a good hard look at your day, your shift, your week, and you might be able to get a little bit of insight from there.
So to recap, if I may, identify the problem.
What happens next?
I don't know. Figure out something that excites you. Like, why do you get excited about it? Maybe change things up and
Take a break.
take a break. Maybe
Consider
those
it.
are the bullet points, the action items.
My gosh, we're going all corporate on you.
Sorry,
You
consultant.
You should be sorry.
But it sounds like a pretty important thing to do, is trying
Absolutely.
to evaluate this and figure out, if it's worth it for you to stay in this business or find something else that excites you. So that wraps up this episode of listener questions. We answered some really fun ones. The costing, the what to do if you're feeling burned out, and the mixologist
Mixology.
question, the classic mixologist question.
The quintessential mixology question.
Right. So hopefully that answered all those questions. And we always love getting more questions. So definitely, if you have a question, feel free to drop it on us.
Yeah, you can actually email it to us. I think, I want to say the email address is cheers@mixologytalk.com. I think that comes straight through to us. Or you can always go to abarabove.com and click on the button for contact form and send them to us that way as well. It'd be nice. We get a lot of Viagra and Cialis questions through that form.
We do,
If you have any actually bartending related questions, that would be really
a nice break. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, hopefully we answered all those questions and look forward to more in the future. And the show notes will be over at mixologytalk.com/135.
135. I double checked.
Perfect. There we go. But yeah, until the next episode, have a great shift, everyone, and cheers.
Cheers.
Hello. La 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 la.
Ah! Ah!
No, you look pretty.
Thank you.